inadequacy that it brings with just watching fanatics sort of take over the place.
I have a question, but first I'd like to make a comment about our own situation with regard to women and liberation in this country. 37 years ago, there was a call by women's organizations for women to go on strike for a day, and that was a very powerful day. I lay to bed most of the night deciding whether or not to do it, and the resulting 24 hours were not easy. At any rate, I'll go on to my question. I'm doing research on an abusive relationship situation for a book I'm working on about 200 years ago in this country. This leads me to my question of how do abusers start as abusers? Now, I've noticed in your book, and I've seen in other circumstances, that it looks like Muslim men are raised to be little princelings, lords and masters, far too early before they really have good sense. But what I'm wondering is, are the women who are raising them, when they're really small, when they're infants and toddlers, are they have so much anger in them that they do things that are abusive to these helpless babies before they have any memory of it, that causes them to be more abusive as they get older? And, you know, I don't know how much you've seen of other people's child rearing, but that's a question that comes to me.
I don't want to be so deterministic as to say, you know, abuse leads to abuse in a way that it can't be changed. So if you grow up in an abusive home, you will definitely turn out to be an abuser. I don't want to say that. And I also don't know where it begins, where the abuse begins and and then the change starts, so that people who become aware of being abused find out that it's something bad and then don't repeat it. But I know from the tribal context where people live in fear, you're afraid of your parents, you're afraid of your teachers, you're afraid of everyone around you, that in that world, violence, be it verbal or physical or sexual, it pays, and it pays on the short term. It's never a long-term thing, and people don't really plan it. They don't plan to destroy anything like that. They're not aware of. They just enhance the bad side in themselves. Where does it start? I don't know. What I know very well is you can end it, and I also know that the people living in an abusive context don't like it. People don't like to live in that tension. And you have a crowd, and you have the crowd mentality. And once you look at that, the single individuals, and you pick them out, none of them wants it, and all of them want change. And I think that's where the proselytizers from religious groups, and especially Islam, come in, because they say, we can change it. As of now, we are going to do things differently. We're going to follow the code of Allah, and peace will come, and love and prosperity. And then you kind of go from, what was it, the frying pan into the fire.
Listening to you talk about the changes you've made, and giving up the religion you knew as a child, and having done that same thing, what impact did it have on your relationship with your family, with your mother, your sisters, your brothers?
It shocked my mother. My mother really believes that hell is something concrete, it's something next door. She asked me when I told her that I no longer believed in God. I told her over the telephone, and she was quiet for something like 2 minutes, and I felt it was the first time that my mother had ever listened to me. And she was the one who always did the talking. And it shocked her, and she asked me the question, how can you ask me to send my child to hell? And I said, but Mama, there's no hell. And she couldn't get over it. And I think that she still really did not get over the shock. My mother thinks I'm probably mentally ill. My father asked me to be discreet and not to tell people that I'm an atheist. And when I said, but what if they ask me? He said, tell them it's impolite to ask people of their religions. And that's not consistent with his earlier upbringing, which was preach unto the infidels of Islam, in which case I would ask, are you a Muslim or not? And if you were to say no, then I would tell you. So he by that way, he preached against his own principles. My brother, whom I really suspect is an atheist, but will never come out of it, but that's my suspicion. The last time I spoke to him, it was early this year, and he said, fine, you want to be an atheist, be an atheist, but why take on 1 billion people? And it's that remark that made me think of, I thought he's much smarter than I am, and I thought and hoped that he is also found enlightenment. The rest of the family members it's either the religion or you, and for them it's the faith, and it's very clear and it's very well defined. It's that complex.
Your prepared marks were quite extraordinary and very persuasive. But what I found even more interesting were the little asides that showed your personhood, that were charming and funny. And in two cases, one where you talked about fundamentalist Muslims and then sort of hinted at that being a redundancy. And then following that with a little bit of the, well, I'm not always politically correct. It was just charming. But it also brought to mind something that some of my culturally self-identified Muslim friends who are agnostics say. And this is going to be a hard question. Do you think you take on Islam with a different kind of antagonism than you take on other religions? There are a lot of them that resent your doing it. And I'm somewhat agnostic as to whether or not that's a valid position.
Yes, I take on Islam with a different sort of antagonism than I do with other religions. First, because today the amount of aggression and violence in the name of a religion that we witness all over the world, most of it is committed in the name of Islam. I was born into Islam, and the number of people taking on Christianity and Judaism who know it far better than I do, many of them in this room today, are doing a wonderful job. I don't have anything to add to Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or God is not great. Well, Hitchens went all ecumenical with all the religions. But I don't have anything to add to that. These people are more brilliant than I am. And I'm also drawing on the history of Western society, where I was exposed to getting out of the box, as they call it, getting out of your own community and looking inside with a critical eye. And I can do that with Islam. So if we do a division of labor, then I would say, yes, I'm taking on Islam because it is the most prominent, but also it's the religion I know the most about.
Before I ask the question, which I was mulling over for some time whether I should ask it or not, I'd like to ask further that I hope you have the time to leave a little more of yourself with your signature and books that we've purchased here, because you are a treasure. My question has to do with political and religious alignments. I attended the Secular Islam Summit. I believe it was earlier this year, yes, February, in St. Petersburg, Florida. Your absence was painful. But except for me and one other member of the local Center for Inquiry, the Center for Inquiry, which has a generally atheist membership, which earlier you combined with atheism, we liberals and atheists. The center sponsored it. But I don't think there was anybody other than us two there who was to the left of Attila the Hun. There was absolutely no media coverage outside of some of Rupert Murdoch's enterprises, Glenn Beck of CNN, and Bret Stephens of the Wall Street Journal. There was the local paper, center, liberal-oriented, owned by a nonprofit organization, printed not a word even about the existence of the summit. Of some of the people, a name that's become current this month because he's published a book virtually suggesting the elimination of Iran is Michael Lidon. I know you are with the American Enterprise Institute. At the summit, virtually nothing was right about Islam. I was recently, and everything was right about the U.S. I was recently at the U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta, where almost nothing was right about the U.S. everything was right about Palestine and most elements in the Middle East. Where do you stand? Where can one make sense of these alignments or misalignments?
I can't explain the absence of media in that conference. I think it was good news, and good news doesn't sell. That may be it. It's good news that there are Muslims who have become ex-Muslims and who are coming out and saying that they're atheists. And I don't know why the New York Times wasn't there. I find that I find it newsworthy, and that's something that should have been on the news. So I can't explain that part. I want to defend Michael Ledeen and his book and say he's not proposing to annihilate Iran. In fact, unlike Poderists, he is, and unlike me, he is like, we should not use military means. He doesn't want to bomb Iran. So you read the book again, and that's the argument, the case that he is making. Where do I stand in this? I think that if freedom is attacked, it's one thing to say you're against violence, but as a liberal, you can't just say, you can't abolish politics. And as long as there is politics, meaning there's conflict among peoples, and some of them are willing to use violence, then logically you must be able to defend yourself. So it's military, but only in self-defense. When the state of Iran declares war on the state of Israel and says we are going to wipe you off the map, if you are the political leaders in Israel, you are going to see how big your army is. That is, you have to look into your inventory of how you can defend yourself. And I think that is, for me, that is where military violence comes in. But the radical Islam, the yearning for the caliphate and how that is spread, a third of it is ideology, a third of it is through emigration, hijrah, and a third of it is military, jihad. My take on it is defend yourself against all three and go on the offensive on all three where appropriate. You can't, when people spread pamphlets, you can't just go bombing them, you also spread your own pamphlets. But when they apply jihad, violence, then you apply violence to make sure that that doesn't happen. It seems common sense, but I understand how complex the situation is, because it's no longer a war where people are wearing uniform and there's a state and a military, and so it's no longer that straightforward. And because it's not that straightforward, we have to be smarter than they are. But ultimately it means when we say this is an open society, you have to, you still need to have the characteristics of an open society. Otherwise you'll be like them.
Modern American Muslim women are very different from Muslim women in the Middle East. They have a great deal of freedom. They're content, dare I say, even happy with the situation here. How do you convince someone like that that the grass is greener on the other side?
Cause dissonance.
May I have your permission to nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize?
Are you honoring?
Thank you.